We're into the final month of the 2024 NRL season. Can you believe that? It felt like Vegas was just yesterday as our eternal runner to death continues. I'm almost 23, so my life is basically over. And for some teams, they've got 4 games left before their season is over. For some, it's actually even less than that, which is a good thing and also is incredibly sad. But let's get straight into these round 24 Rip Kobe tips. And we're starting off with a banger. The Melbourne Storm, they travel to Penrith to take on the Panthers in what will be probably a minor premiership decider. And from one perspective, this is probably the best times for these two teams to meet because both of them haven't been good over the past couple of weeks. Yes, they've been winning mostly. The Storm obviously lost to the Dragons a fortnight ago and got away with a win against South Sydney last Thursday, whilst Penrith had to produce one of the great comebacks of all time, and Liam Munn had to run over Dejan Arce without the football. Everyone is going to say they cannot wait for this one, and you'll be shocked to hear that I completely agree. This is probably a grand final preview. Penrith are heavy favourites, which is quite interesting because when you figure out the way these teams have played over the last couple of months, you think the Melbourne Storm probably have the clear advantage. Penrith are still getting used to having Nathan Cleary back in this footy side, and the Melbourne Storm, well, they're getting used to having Cameron Munster back in this footy team too. So it's going to create an interesting dynamic, and it's a great test to see how good Jerome Hughes actually is, because I'm with most people. I think he's probably the Dally M leader at the moment. Even if it wasn't these stupid voting rules, he'd be my vote to win the Dally M. But Penrith's forward pack is absolutely insane, and as good as Melbourne have been, I still have questions around that forward pack when they come up against Penrith and they've come up against the Roosters, even though so far they've passed with flying colours. If it was at Melbourne, I'd be tipping the Melbourne Storm, but I just think Penrith are going to have too much firepower. I still believe that they're without the fish, so maybe that helps out. Well, that it does help the Storm out incredibly well, but I do think while the Storm, they needed to play Penrith a couple of weeks ago, I just think Melbourne are getting used to having Cameron Munster back in this footy team, and I also think that both teams aren't going to show their hand too much. Not to throw this game, I do think they're going to be playing hard for that minor premiership, and let's face it, these teams would much rather play the Sharks or Manly or the Dogs in week 1 than have to play the Sydney Roosters. So there is a lot to play for, but I do think both of these coaches know not to play their hand. I mean, you look back all the way back to 2021, Melbourne actually played Manly the last couple of rounds, and it was a pretty close game. Tommy actually had a good game. Melbourne still won, and then they came out the first week of finals to have that game plan to absolutely bully Turbo, and they absolutely pumped Manly. So Craig Bellamy, he's done this before, and Ivan Cleary has too. Obviously, he had some game plan things for South Sydney, and they ended up having that shock loss in week 1. Obviously, there's heaps to play for here, but I do think these are two of the best coaches in the competition, hence why they're first and second, and these teams won't bugger off from letting anyone else have a crack at holding the premiership. Hopefully this is going to deliver. It is the game of the year, but I am going to take Penrith because they are at home. They only have a few games left at Bluebet Stadium. I just think that they've got pretty similar matchups on paper, and then the forward pack is absolutely one-way traffic in the way of Penrith. Now, Melbourne have been very good this year. Obviously, they're literally first, but I do think Penrith will win because guess what Penrith have done for the last 4 years? And that's win. And they love beating Melbourne. I can't remember the last time Melbourne actually beat Penrith outside of Origin round. The early Friday game sees Manly host the Warriors back at Brookvale Oval for the first time in a month. It's been too long. Unfortunately for the Wars, they're at the point where they're mathematically a chance, but they're going to have to go so many things go their way, and they're going to have to win the last remaining games. They do get the bye in the final round, so if they can sneak their way into that, would be a huge advantage. They're going to have to win the next few weeks, not only to keep their season alive, but to keep Sean Johnson's career going. So this might be one of his final games in Sydney, so hopefully he plays. He was meant to play last but got ruled out with an injury, and unfortunately that's been the case for Sean Johnson this year, but it's also unfortunately been the case where his player, they haven't been exactly flying by either, unfortunately, which I'm dropping so many times in a row here, that word. But it's been such a disappointing season for the Wars. After one where the entire country of New Zealand got behind them, they came into this year, Super Rugby were moving out finals for the Warriors, and unfortunately just another case of a flash in the pan. Obviously we'll see how Webster goes. Their season isn't technically over yet, and they could very well win this game. They got a big forward pack, and that's what troubled Manly back in that game when they drew earlier in the year. Manly's backline has got a lot of players, and Warriors edges haven't been great defensively this year, but they can play that big power game with Fanua Blake, with Mitchie Barnett, Manly's forward pack isn't exactly the most mobile. And once Brown and Paseka leave the field, the gaps could really open up through the middle. So I think it's a clear game plan for the Warriors. And it's a Friday 6 p.m. So it's not a Saturday arvo and it's not a Sunday arvo where Manly have had their bread and butter at home this year. So we'll see how the Warriors go. I said last week that Manly had the better team on paper, but the Rays were a bad matchup. The Warriors are sort of similar, but I think Manly should win this one and win this one 13+. The main game on the Friday sees the Chookies taking on the Eels, and if the Eels play as well as they did the last 2 weeks, maybe they can give the Roosters a shake. The Chookies are pretty much settled into that top 4, and I don't think they have the toughest run home. So I think Robinson will probably just go through the motions for this one, as will the Roosters. I think if anything, Robinson probably wants them to keep that scoreboard down because they nearly blew both of their big leads that they had both against the Dolphins and against Manly. So maybe putting the Eels to the sword and keeping them close to 0 points might be the game plan here, but we shall see. Do I give the Eels a chance? I guess I do because they're human beings, but I think the Roosters probably absolutely kill them. The match of the round, Smokey. Obviously, no one's beating Penrith and Storm, but the Dolphins, they are taking on the Doggies up there in Bundaberg, and, you know, maybe all the boys will take the trip from Belmore. I think the Bulldogs have actually always done pretty good up there from what I recall. Maybe I'm talking out of my rugby league arse. And I'm not professional, so I'm not going to bother to check. But the Dolphins have to win this game, not to keep their finals hopes alive, but they can pretty much cement their spot there if they can get the win and the Dolphins lose. Because we're at that point of the year, the Dogs, they probably have to keep winning just to wait until the Sharks slip up if they want to make the top 4. But it's a fine balance because you probably want to drop a game for the Bulldogs because they've gone on such an impressive winning streak. So we'll see how this one pans out. It's another case of similar matchups. Obviously, the Dolphins, they have the advantage in the forward pack, but it is an older forward pack, and they're going to be dealing with the pace of a younger, more mobile Bulldogs pack, which is small, but holy heck, it is proving to be a problem for opposition teams. They're relying so much on their back 5, who have been absolutely incredible coming out of their own end, and Curtin Mann has been a revelation. I don't know what you do with Jermaine Salmon, and I can't believe that a problem between who to start between Curtin Mann and Jermaine Salmon was on my 2024 Rugby League bucket list. So I'm very much looking forward to this game, especially from a Manly Seagulls perspective, and I do think the Dolphins could give an upset here. They've been going out to big leads and blowing them, and the way the Bulldogs have been not just defending, which they've done all year, but the way they've been attacking in recent weeks has been absolutely incredible. And it's at the point now where at least I know what I'm going to get with the Bulldogs. So you know what? I'm actually going to tip the Bulldogs. The Cowboys host the Raiders, and this has quickly become a must-win game for the Raiders. When they pumped South, it felt like Ricky was just going to sneak these Raiders into the top 8 once again, but they've had a bad couple of weeks. Not performance-wise. Last week was pretty disappointing against Manly. They had that 9-1 penalty count after the first 20 minutes and couldn't go on with it, and then obviously the Tapane sin bin happened. Whereas the Cowboys, they might have just blown any chance of making the top 4. They can still easily finish in the top 6, which I think they'll need to do. 5th is probably the sweet spot for these teams because obviously you got Bulldogs, Sharks, and Manly along with the Cowboys in that lockjam. You probably need to finish 5th. That might be even better than 4th. Then you get to play where it's the Dragons or the Dolphins who finish in 8th and probably get the Sharks in week 2. You also get that first finals at home, whereas if you finish 6th, you're probably going to have to play one of these other teams in this lockjam, and it's pretty hard to separate these teams because Manly and Cowboys have the better roster, but the Dogs are the better team overall. So any one of those teams could probably beat each other on any given day, but then in week 2, you're probably going to have to play the loser of the Roosters once they lose to probably the Melbourne Storm or Penrith. As for who wins this game, I've got no bloody idea. Trying to pip a Cowboys game is like trying to flip a coin that has 50,000 bloody sides. If the Cowboys didn't win last week, I'd probably tip them as this is the game to drop because the Raiders have been having good starts and just not being able to get the job done. But I think that loss last week could be a great wake-up call. And the wake-up call like these teams haven't got yet, maybe the Cowboys can somehow benefit from getting pumped by their arch rivals. So I'm going to take the Cowboys 1-12. And what a main event for Saturday night. The final game. Everyone will be watching the Tigers taking on the Rabbitohs. And can I just tip the Tigers? Because I want to be nice. The Rabbitohs, they're falling off a cliff once again. Yes, they kept it close with Melbourne, I guess. But Melbourne, that was the worst game they've played all year. And if the Tigers can just win one more game, then get their bye 2 points, then it sets up the spoon bowl. And rugby league needs a spoon bowl. I want the Tigers to have a chance to not get the spoon in a game of rugby league. This is a completely biased tip here. But the Rabbitohs, your season's over. Latrell's drinking bloody cruises. So I'm going to go with the Tigers. Because why the heck rugby league not? South's season's over anyway, so who cares? Interesting one on Sunday. The Dragons, they take on the Titans. And if you're following the pattern of the one loss since round 9, the Dragons probably win this game. But holy heck, the Titans, what happened? I was talking you up. I was saying you're going to beat the Sharks, go on maybe a little run towards finals because your draw wasn't actually too bad. And then you come out and do that against a halves pairing that wouldn't look out of place in the local Sydney reserve grade comp. But it's a big week for the Titans. Kieran Foran plays his 300th game. And fun fact, Foran will be the first ever player to play his 300th game while wearing a Titans jersey. So a pretty nice moment for the Gold Coast. Probably one of their best in history, which is unfortunate considering they've probably been around for a long time by now. But I refuse to tip against the pattern that saw them beat the Melbourne Storm in Melbourne, and I just can't trust the Titans. And the Titans are probably at the point now where I just can't trust them until I see it, so I probably won't even have them in the 8 next year. There's good signs there, though. But Flano has just got something with the Dragons, and I think they're just going to probably roll the Titans, while the Titans are upset because their season's over. And finally, the Sharks taking on the Knights. The Knights weren't too convincing over the Tigers, and the Knights haven't been too convincing all season. The Sharks are in the exact same boat, but I think the Sharks might have clicked back into gear. They might get Trindle or Nico Hines back, which would be a huge plus for them. And I won't lie, the bias in me really wants to see Newcastle win this game so that top 4 becomes wide open once again, but I don't think the Knights have convinced me that they can do it. I think the Sharks playing that big power game, while it should be much harder against the Knights team, who do have a pretty good forward pack, that forward pack has under-delivered all season. So I'm going to tip the Sharks to get the job done, especially at home on a glorious Sunday arvo in the Shire. But there are my shout out to Kobe Bryant, around 24 tips for this season. I'm taking Penrith 1-12 over Melbourne in the big one, Manly 13+, the Roosters 13+, the Bulldogs 1-12, the Cowboys 13+, the Tigers 1-12, the Dragons 13+, and the Sharks 1-12. Let me know your tips in that comment section down below. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't yet already, and I'll see you in the next one.